A while ago, I was reading a book titled Game and Essays on Algorithmic Culture by our American media professor, Alexander R. Galloway, and I have stumbled upon the concept of the four moments, or the quadrants. In order to understand this better, Galloway first makes a distinction between the operator and the machine. The operator is basically you. You provide input and the game's AI reacts by turning that input into a meaningful action, or at least the action you'd anticipate. The machine is more like the game's mechanics rather than the game itself. It responds to the operator and tries to keep the software intact. The interaction between the machine and the operator resembles the action of playing the game. According to Galloway, such an action would be divided between diegetic and non-diegetic acts. Those terms were usually used for movies and purely narrative media. Diegetic acts are supposed to be anything that could advance the narrative, while non-diegetic acts signify the opposite. In gaming, diegetic acts are supposed to advance overall progression, tackling elements that take place within the experience itself, such as the characters or the missions, while non-diegetic acts signify elements that are external to the game, such as the main menu settings, the credits, or even the soundtrack. While it is kinda debatable, some might go as far as to treat the gameplay as a non-diegetic act, given the obvious dissonance you feel sometimes between the characters and what they're capable of doing once you take the wheel. So the quadrant takes this shape. As both the operator and the machine are capable of initiating both acts for a variety of purposes, quadrants help balance the procedure and create a world and experience. Pretty straightforward, right? Now, what happens when a game needs two operators instead? That's basically the selling point of any co-op game, whether we're talking about Brothers by Starbreeze Studios or anything by Hazelight Studios so far. While A Way Out was amazing, the boundaries of co-op were pushed to the limit with It Takes Two. Not only did the game deliver a simple yet lovable story, but their imaginative approach to level design and gameplay mechanics allowed them to expand in ways no one could expect. In following the Game Awards of 2021, there was always the question of how they could exceed their success. 4 years later, Split Fiction was released, and the rest is history. Well, pretty recent history. Split Fiction is the literal embodiment of the split screen experience, splitting settings, mechanics, genres, and mixing them in a careful way during the story's high notes. Definitely blurring the line between diegetic and non-diegetic acts, especially once you get to the most insane levels I have witnessed in recent gaming.
What level in Split Fiction had the most revisions?
The ending. Toughest one for sure.
It's the biggest, most elaborate.
The stuff I can guarantee you haven't seen in a game like this before.
How would you describe the ending without spoiling it?
You know, fucking shit up in the right Hazelight way.
First, let's talk about the build up to the level. In the interview I showed earlier between Joseph Addis and MinMax, he mentions that the game's codename used to be Split. Now, this would get a lot more interesting once you realize that this is actually the name of the final chapter, and when the final mission is named after the game's title, you know you're in for the ride of your life. But apart from that, the choice of titles within any medium is a direct window to the creation process of any artistic endeavor. The insanity of the final chapter was exactly what the developers had in mind when they were creating the game. Obviously, it would not be ideal to stretch it throughout a 14-hour playthrough, because A, it would require a lot more effort, so the game's development cycle could have been extended beyond their initial plans, and B, it could ruin the build up for the final level, both in terms of gameplay and narrative. While every single chapter, including the minigames, shook the community out of the industry's current fatigue, the final chapter's level design was an example of saving the best for the last. In terms of story, I would say that the game's narrative was easily predictable. The game would jump between two worlds in each chapter. You learn more about Mio during her chapters and more about Zoe during hers. Whoever is trapped in the other's world would have to actively get out of their comfort zone to succeed. It's basically a buddy film. Personally, I've always liked buddy films for the wit, humor, and action, but there is nothing memorable about their narrative as a whole, nothing that would last with you after the credits. With that said, I really like the two chapters Isolation and Hollow, because they concluded Mio and Zoe's character arcs perfectly. The endgame was the peak of their character development, and the lack of minigames in both chapters could reflect how that part of the game had a much more serious tone, focused on delivering a purely narrative effect rather than a humorous one.
I'm so sorry.
Having these developed versions of the protagonists go against Raider in the final chapter was the only thing left for the story to conclude, because the original goal of the conflict was to leave the simulation. So in a way, I kinda liked it, even though it may have been a little generic at times. Also, I can't help but feel conflicted in terms of relatability, because the developers crafted the chapters perfectly. As a player, I wanted to remain inside the simulation because the game was consistently pushing the boundaries of imagination. The concept of the real world is something we would associate with boring. Also, midway through the game, my co-op friend and I wondered how the experience of the other riders was during the events of the game. We even expected that we may hijack their worlds while the machine was falling apart, but sadly that didn't come to pass. That would have been an amazing idea for a potential DLC. Now let's talk about the gameplay, or to be specific, the kind of skill progression you're supposed to build throughout the playthrough. That doesn't fully apply to Split Fiction because the majority of the skills are both character and chapter exclusive. The only transferable skills are basically platforming related, things like wall running, jumping, dashing, and so on. You see, every time a chapter starts in Split Fiction, it feels like you're picking the game for the first time. Still, what if that's not 100% true? I believe that there is a single skill that is crucially needed to finish the game, a skill that resides at the core of every co-op game. As the game has been released in March, I'm sure that a lot of you would have heard about the bullshit laser level by now. It's a secret level that you can find near the end of Isolation. As you can see, it's a platforming based level that will force you to time your jumps and movements, with a huge margin for error and a very tight window for slipping through. Mind you, that's not even the difficult part. The challenging part about the secret level is making sure that you both get to the end of the challenge, because you will keep encountering a door that will only open with both of you present. If one of you gets there alone without the other, you will lose after a certain countdown. Remember the concept of the quadrants. This is regarded as one of the difficulties of having two operators. So not only do you have to worry about yourself, but you would have to worry about your partner as well. You could be doing some decent progress, but your partner isn't. The same could be said about you as well. The laser level was the game's extreme attempt at reinforcing codependency. Remember that every co-op game is inherently expected to leave the pieces of the puzzle at the hands of the players equally, and those pieces can only construct the path ahead if the players fully cooperated. And Split Fiction does nothing but capitalize on this principle as much as it could. You see, the final chapter does not have a chapter-specific skill mechanic like the shapeshifting in Hopes of Spring. Instead, both characters are in two different realms, but they share the same sandbox. You need to rely on your partner's instructions just to traverse the terrain. You are no longer focused on your own screen, but on theirs as well. In a way, the two operators were blended into one, like two hemispheres of the same brain. Then you are thrown into the chase scene where you can move in between two worlds despite the obvious split that was once a limitation. You would escape the obstacle in your own world by jumping into the other's world, symbolizing how you are able to find safety and comfort where you were once a stranger. After the first phase with Raider, this time the split line is dynamic and dependent on how your characters move. You are again forced to make sure to synchronize your traversal, as moving too soon or too late can send the other player off-world. Following the second phase, Zoe finds herself stepping on a TV screen with the ability to stomp on it to create a ripple effect inside it. Mio, who is stuck inside the TV, would have to rely on Zoe to push ahead. Even though Zoe is not under the threat of dying during this segment of the level, helping Mio get out is the only way they could both progress. Then the tables are flipped as Mio holds a phone-sized screen inside which Zoe is stuck, and she can help her by tilting the screen and affecting the gravity inside. Same function, only different roles. Then you face off against Raider one final time. At some point in each phase, the glitch grants both characters the ability to use a different weapon, and what I found challenging about the boss was the element of distraction. Remember that the dual protagonist's strength against the game's enemies lies in splitting the roles of distracting and landing damage, so Raider did nothing but strike back with her own venom. You're constantly choosing between attacking Raider or avoiding his attacks. I liked how during the final phase, he brings out enemies from the playthrough as his own minions. While you could do both, you're less likely to die as a pair if you split the role of taking out the enemies and shooting at Raider, or you could both take out the enemies to ensure that they die faster so you can free yourselves for him. Of course, without forgetting that if one of you dies, pressure will be placed on the other to survive as long as possible. The boss fight ends with Zoe, Mia, and Raider falling across their own worlds, which was a mind-blowing yet beautiful way of saying goodbye to the simulation. Both players would later have to mash buttons in order to close Raider's rift. Symbolizing the force of antagonism, Raider keeps them apart, and the character's insistence on closing the rift reflects how much they would like to be reunited with each other, which stands in complete opposition to how they felt about each other during the beginning of the game. Looking back at the release of the game, it was easier to assume at the time that Split Fiction was going to do what It Takes Two did, with the sole contender for Game of the Year being Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. Now, as we're approaching the end of 2025, The community has witnessed the release of fierce contenders, all excelling in certain aspects, and it is no longer clear who will come out on top. With that said, it would be criminal to deny the fact that Split Fiction is Game of the Year material. I understand that the game has been undermined by a story that is lacking in narrative strength in comparison to its predecessor. Split Fiction may share the mother genre as It Takes Two, but it definitely isn't It Takes Two, nor does it even claim to be. For reasons outlined in this video, the gameplay and the level design is where Split Fiction greatly excels, and the final level is a direct proof that the developers are still able to surprise us with amazing ideas, as they still possess what a lot of other creators in the industry lack nowadays, the needed imagination and the willingness to execute it regardless of the cost and effort. Thank you so much for watching this video. What are your thoughts on Split Fiction? How did you react when you first got to the final level? Make sure to tell me all about it in the comments below. If you've enjoyed watching this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more. I'll see you in the next one.